Hello, and welcome back to Factorio. I am Dorthek, and this is the third and final part of our train tutorial for Factorio. In the last episodes, we discussed laying railroad track and building trains. We discussed signals on straightaways, on intersections, on merges and splits. We discussed the limitations of bidirectional trains and how to use common intersection types, the entrance to a spur or a station, the exit from one, and the T-junction. We also talked about different spacing, and in this tutorial we're going to continue to use the 3-space model. So today we're going to talk about stations. So I set up a very simple 2-station setup here. This is the pickup station, and this is the delivery station. We have 2 trains that are set to go to the pickup station and wait there until their inventory is full, and then to go to the delivery station until their inventory is empty. Now this one is holding at the delivery station because I tossed a random pistol into the cargo wagon, which it can't get rid of. And then this, it's maybe hard to see, but this train is not waiting where it's... Oh, yes. So this is this train, and then this train is waiting right there. Let me move it manually because just so you can see it a little bit. This is the train setup I use very often. It uses 1 locomotive on each end, and then 4 cars in the middle. Why do it this way? Well, I used to use these setups like this, which worked well, but adding 1 more locomotive makes it faster. The maximum speed of a train, as I understand it, doesn't change, but the acceleration does, and the acceleration depends on how many locomotives you have and how many cars you have. Note that this is not a two-directional train. This locomotive is facing forward, and this locomotive is facing forward. They're both pulling in the same direction. Now, I could just as easily have the both locomotives in front, but because I used to do the 1 and 4 setups, it was easier for me to add 1 in the back than to have to rebuild a lot of my bases and stations. So that's where we're at. Let's put this back on automatic, and it'll stop at the rail signal here. So let's talk about setting up the stations. What I have here is some iron ore coming in. It doesn't matter where it's coming in from. I'm using some of the editor in infinity mode tools to generate it. What's important is how we load it. So if we mouse over the train, we can see where the cars are going to be. Now, the first one's a locomotive, then we'll have 4 cars, and the last one is a locomotive as well. Now, in Vanilla Factorio, the only way to load and unload trains is with inserters. Since this is a loading station, we're going to use inserters, and this very conveniently, when you get an inserter near the trains, it shows you the car positions. So, we can place 6 inserters on each side of each car. Now, you will notice that I'm using stack inserters. At the very beginning, you may not have them, so you'll want to use fast inserters, but as soon as possible, you're going to want to switch to stack inserters, because the biggest delays with trains is the loading and unloading time. Now, we need some power, and medium power poles work very well with this. We are going to use some off-screen power to power them. It's not really important how that works. This is just for the tutorial. Now, we could bring in a belt of iron, like so, or like so, and pick up from the belt and put it in the train. However, we do not want to do that. The reason we do not want to do that is twofold. Number one, unlike belts, which run continuously, trains run in bursts. One train comes, then another train comes, there's a gap in between. So it's helpful to have buffers. Number two, it turns out that a In Factorio, an inserter moving from one inventory object to another inventory object is much faster than one moving from a belt to an inventory object or vice versa. Now, both chests and train cars are inventory objects. So, we want to use chests as buffers. Now, I tend to use steel chests. It doesn't matter. You can use iron. I mean, you can even use wood. Remember, you have 6 of these to one cart. So each car has 40 slots. Each chest has 48, but there's 6 of them. So we're talking about, what, 9 times as many? So even if we used wooden chests, which only have, what is that, 15? 16? 6 of them is still 86 slots to load a 40. So even wood chests are enough to create a buffer. I tend to use steel chests because I tend to standardize to those. Now, obviously we also have to load into the chests. So now there are different ways to do this. You can set up elaborate splitter structures. I tend to make it very simple, especially early game. I tend to do this. This is not the most efficient way to do it. It's just a very convenient way to do it. Now, if we want to really load very quickly, we can also put the same thing on the other side. And that's fine if you only have one station. The thing is, very often, you have multiple stations. You know, something like what we saw up here. And then it becomes a question of, well, how much space do you want between this station? Right? If right now we can take this and place it about here. We'd have to get the belts in somehow, so maybe here. But if we were using the two-sided stations, then the closest we can really put it is about here or here, a lot further away. It's up to you. It depends on what's more important, very quick filling of the stations or of the trains or space. I will often just use one side. Now, over here, we can just use we can feed from here. We can build a balancer. Now, I happen to know this is balanced because of the way I'm generating it, but good practice absolutely is to use a balancer. Okay, and so our belts will fill, and you'll notice that they're not really filling evenly, right? It's filling the middle ones and then the outer ones. And the truth is, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that you fill each car more or less evenly, because you don't want one car to wait for the next car. And the balancer ensures us that that's what's going to happen. Now, note that these second rank of loaders aren't doing anything. The second rank of inserters aren't doing anything, and it's because they recognize that there's no train there. So let's talk a little bit about the train. Let's flip this train into manual mode. Let's pick up this gun. It doesn't matter. I'm going to drive it over. Now, if I'm in manual mode and I stop, they're going to start loading. That's important to know. However, if I am in automatic mode and for some reason the train is only partially placed there, like say we have let's say I put a signal here and another train there to block it, and I tell this to go to the pickup station, it knows it's not fully in the station, so the inserters are not firing. Once I remove this one and it gets into its spot, it will fully load. Okay, and we can see that it's loading. You can mouse over the locomotive to see the total cargo contents. It's coming up, 3.4, 3.5, 3.7K. With stacks of 50 and 40 slots and 4 wagons, each train of this type can get 8,000 ore. So here we go, we're coming up on 8,000. Now, because this rear car partially loaded into the front car, we're getting a little bit of unbalance. These cars are full, this one is still filling up. That should not happen after this initial one, except it will because the trains are too close together. Well, that's okay. Okay, so now this train is sitting here waiting for unloading because it's saying to wait until inventory empty. Let me put it back on manual and just drive it out of the way so that it's not gonna try to load into it. And let's talk about unloading. Now, we can use the same basic idea and go into boxes. However, it is significantly more important when you're offloading than when you're loading, to make sure that you have balanced unloading. If some of the boxes are more full than others, you're going to have a problem. Let's power. Okay, so there are many different ways to do it, but one of those ways, one of the best ways, involves circuit conditions, which we're not going to go into right now. But if we just did something like this, this will work, right? These 3 will output onto the outer lane, these 2 will output onto the outer lane, and this one will output to the right, so you will have a more or less balanced belt. But as this belt starts to back up, these will stop working first, then those. The reason we want it balanced is because, again, we don't want to be waiting for the train. And here we can ensure balance by using a balancer. Right? This guarantees us that each car is getting the same amount, and once the buffers fill up, that will work fine. We had unbalanced because I was playing games with the manual, but here we have no real way to do that. Now, ideally, if we were using this technique, and this is an acceptable technique, it's just not necessarily the best one. If we were using this, we would... that's one too many. We would then feed this into a balancer and make sure that we're feeding from a balancer. This will absolutely work. And in fact, when I first set up my stations, I will frequently use this. Now, it so happens that when an inserter unloads onto a belt, it's actually a little bit slower than if the inserter is unloading onto a splitter. And that gives us a very strange seeming but useful station design method. And the idea behind this method is to use both sides, which we just discussed the limitations on, but this is a reasonably compact way to do it. And we're not going to use all 4 on each one. And the trade-off is going to be that we will use some on the other side. So what we're going to do is we're going to use 4 unloaders per wagon on one side and 4 on the other. Now, yes, this means that we are offloading both sides. That's the price of throughput. Now, we are going to, as before, we're going to offload into chests first, because we always want to offload into the chests, both for buffer purposes and because it is faster to offload from the train to the chest. And we'd rather offload the train as quickly as possible so it can go get the next load, and while it's on its way, we can take our time emptying the chests. But then from the chests themselves, we can do this. We will use a splitter. Like this. And this will empty onto the splitters, which will then dump onto the belts, and we will take 2 belts off from each car. Now in this case, we are looking for 4 belts, because that's what we're set up for. So we will simply merge them like so. Now, this is very efficient, but it is completely unnecessary if we're using yellow belts. Okay, let's make a copy of this without the train bits, and stick this over here. The truth is, if we're limited to yellow belts, this would have been perfectly adequate. And the reason is, because we're outputting onto a single yellow belt, this will saturate that yellow belt without any trouble. However, if we were to upgrade this to blue belts, that's where this option really dominates. In fact, with blue belts, we would actually go one step further. We would not do it this way. We would do it like so. Nope, did not mean to upgrade that. And get 4 full belts of resources out. This method unloads quickly enough to saturate 4 blue belts. Definitely not needed for a single yellow. So I will post a blueprint of this version in the blueprints library, but we're going to use the easy method right now. Now, we definitely want to use a balancer, because depending on what we're doing with our output belts, we want to make sure that we're offloading in a balanced fashion and not having some wagons offload faster than others. Even the fact that we have slightly different lengths can impact things adversely. If you really want perfect balancing, the way to do that is with circuits, and I may do a video on that separately at some point, but it's certainly beyond the basic tutorial. Right, and these belts are set up so that they go on to to have all the material destroyed using some infinity mode tools. All right. So here we have a full train, 8,000 iron ore on it. Go to the delivery station. And as you can see, we're completely saturating those 4 belts. And this is why it's not really necessary to use the other side or to do those fancy tricks with side loaders, because the yellow belts simply can't support it. You can see we're even in between while the trains are loading, there's enough buffer that it's going to saturate. Let's see, will we get an interruption? Hopefully not. Nope, there was enough in the buffers to make sure that there's no interruption. Now, of course, this is a very short track. If the distance between these two was much longer, we would get more in the way of interruptions, and the solution for that is more physical trains, provided, of course, that your source can feed fast enough. These buffers, however, you can see are rapidly emptying out, but that's okay, because with only yellow belts feeding this, we don't even need all 6 sets of inserters. So, you can see how well that's working. Oh, that was necessary. Now, there is one more thing that we can add to this, and that's train fueling. So if we put a box here and an inserter, we put a box here, and here, and we can place into this a bunch of fuel. Let's say we're using nuclear fuel. And this way, the trains will be refueled automatically. Now, if we are doing that, we're going to want to add one more thing to this. So you'll notice that even though we have a condition on these trains, we can add a second condition. And what we're going to do is add a condition of inactivity. 5 seconds is fine. We can bring it down to 3 seconds if we really want to be very optimal. And now we have this button that says OR. So this will send the train along if either of these conditions is true, but I don't want either, I want both. Inactivity, 3 seconds. You can actually, it's handy to see, you can see the inventory bar is increasing, the inactivity one isn't quite. We're going to change it to end. Actually, we don't need it on the pickup station, we only need it at the delivery station. And the reason for that is inactivity means that no inserter is trying to put anything in or take anything out of the train. What that means is if, for any reason, this is offloaded very quickly, but this is still trying to load fuel, it will wait until the fuel loading is done. That's not really obvious here, so let me do this. So if instead of nuclear fuel, we have something like coal or solid fuel coming in, and we can take it over this way as well. And then we will take all but one of the nuclear fuel out. Okay, let's wait for this train to go on. Right, almost. So you see it's taking it a while here to load it fully with the fuel, and we want to make sure it's fully fueled before it goes on its merry way. To that end, let's get this filled, and let's take out the rest of the nuclear fuel. So now you can see that even though... Oh, this one actually doesn't have the inactivity. So now you can see that even though the cargo inventory is empty, it's going to keep waiting until it gets its 3 seconds of inactivity because it is fully fueled. You can see that here as well. Let's say this train, for whatever reason, was not full, just to get timings to work well. So it's not going to take very long at all to empty it. But there, it's the empty cargo inventory condition is satisfied, but the inactivity is still happening because it's still loading fuel. As soon as it's full, the train will go on its merry way. So this is one way to fuel your train at one station or the other. This works well when your stations, with your early stations, because early on stations tend to be get some resource from far away and bring it back to your base, and at base you have your coal or solid fuel or rocket fuel or whatever you want to feed it. Later on, you will frequently get situations where trains run between two remote outposts. At that point, you can of course use other trains to bring coal or solid fuel or something to one of those outposts as well, but if it doesn't need them, it's kind of a pain in the neck. So the better way to do it is to set up separate depot stations. So we can do that like this. That's not gonna fit our... let's say we have this as our depot, sure. So let's turn this off. Oops. We will call this depot, and we will place a loader here and a loader here. And a box, and a loader, and a loader there. Actually, let's set you back on manual. And this is our depot station. And now we're going to say, at a station, depot, we want the depot to be between the delivery, we wanted to go to pickup, then depot, then deliver station. Here we're going to say inactivity, and we're going to get rid of that here. And we will copy this to the other train. And now the train will stop long enough to refuel and then continue on. Ah, I screwed up. However, my screw-up will show us a very, very valuable lesson. Look what just happened. I accidentally allowed the cars to get filled with solid fuel, and now we have solid fuel in our lines here. That could be a disaster. So how do we prevent that? Well, one answer is, well, we just make sure we're perfect every time. And that's an answer, but the truth is we all screw up. There are two ways to prevent mis-unloading, and personally, I would use them both every single time. So, number one, instead of stack unloaders here, I would use stack filter unloaders. Now, you have to tell them what you're unloading. There's two ways to do that. You can say only take iron ore and then cut and paste that across, or you can use a very simple circuit network. We're not really talking about circuit networks here, but I'm going to show you the base of it. And basically we're just going to place a single constant combinator here. We're going to tell it to output something. This is going into the blueprint. So for the blueprint, I usually tell it to output a fish signal. I stole that from Hapalas. And then I'm going to use some red or green, doesn't matter, wire to go from the constant combinator to the power pole to each of these inserters to the next power pole. And the reason I'm putting it on the power pole in the inserter, actually this should go over here, is because I can then copy this and paste it like so, and I get all these red wires for free. I don't have to pay for them. Now I'm going to open one of these inserters, and rather than enable, disable, or anything here, I'm going to tell it to do set filters, and it will set the filter based on our constant combinator. Now, of course, our constant combinator right now is not set to anything, and I like using fish for the blueprints. Well, there's no fish, but if we now change this to iron ore, off they go. And now, if we accidentally dump a bunch of solid fuel in here, the inserters are never going to pick it up. We're never going to contaminate. However, what we will have, let's say we screwed up somewhere. Let's say we did something like this, right? Accidentally. And a not quite full train got there, and I dumped a bunch of solid fuel into the wrong car. Well, putting in the stack inserters there resolved that problem. We're not gonna offload the solid fuel that's already theirs from before. Yeah, you can see all that's left is the solid fuel, and it's not picking it up. But it's going to stay in here, and the next time around, maybe it'll pick up some more garbage. So the other way to do it is to filter the inventory slots of the trains themselves. I'm going to set it to manual. Unfortunately, this is a little tedious the first time. If we open the wagon and click on here with the middle mouse button. We can say set a filter. This will now only accept iron ore. Unfortunately, we do have to set it for each spot individually. We can do shift right click and then shift left click, but we can't like swipe or anything. We have to individually click each one of these. Okay, however, once we've done that, we can cut and paste it across wagons. And we can cut and paste it onto this train as well. And now, if we send it to the depot and put back this stray inserter, that inserter is not going to try to stick the wrong material in there. So we now have double redundancy, double safety. These filter inserters protect the base, the station, from getting the wrong input, and filtering our cars protects the trains themselves from being filled up with the wrong junk. This can also be used sometimes for other purposes. A very convenient thing to do, and I will demonstrate it in the main tutorial series, is a building train, which is a train that you can take around with you to help you build outposts and such. And you often want to filter the card to take lots of different things. For example, you can do something like this. Suppose I want to use this card to bring me more rails and also more stack inserters. Okay. Now, depending on what I have more of and what the stack sizes are, I get a weird mishmash of them. So instead, what I can do if I want a certain amount is I could say, okay, in this one, what I want is you know, 3 rows of rails and only 1 row of stack inserters. And now they will only put them in the correct spot, and once one of these is full, it doesn't really matter what's going on. So even though the wagon is not full, the stack inserter filler is done filling them. Very useful for that sort of thing. So that was our station for moving solid goods. However, we also frequently need to move liquids. As I mentioned before, very often the first train you use is going to be used to bring in oil. So how do we handle that? Well, once again, I set up a little test track with 2 trains. And this is a pipe here that's bringing in crude oil, an unlimited amount of it. And we want to deliver it into this pipe, which will eat all of it thanks to the magic of editor mode and infinity mod. So once again, we have 2 stations, liquid pickup station, liquid drop-off station, and we have 2 trains set to pick up until it's full and drop off until it's empty. So what do we do with it? Well, first off, we need liquid cart. These work more or less the same as our solid cart, but for liquids. Well, that makes sense. So that's our trains. Now, I should add a footnote here. It is possible to move liquids by putting them into barrels and putting the barrels onto a train. It's not, however, particularly efficient, because each one of these cars takes 25,000 units of liquid. If we look at barrels, they're over here somewhere. A barrel holds 50 units of crude oil. We can fit 40 stacks of barrels, and barrels stack to 10. So each stack is 500 oil, and 40 stacks of that is 20,000 oil into a regular solid car, whereas these take 25,000. So this is just more efficient. But how do we load them and offload them? Well, this can be a bit tricky, and it's important to get right. First of all, you always want to load and offload on a straightaway. We've seen with solids we can get away with a little bit of curves. We cannot do that with liquids. Now, if you look at the top of the liquid car, you can see there's kind of like 3 separate tanks, and those are basically your attachment points. So the way we would do this is we use pumps. Now, normally, a pump is something you would place between liquid to help pump it along and move it faster and act as a flow check. However, if you place a pump right next to a wagon, it'll do something more interesting. You've got to make sure it's in the right spot. When I place the pump right here, you can see its outline changes, and it gives me a yellow bracket. So you have to make sure that yellow bracket is there. So now that I've placed this pump, and give it power, you can see it's extended a thing that attached to the wagon. Since the arrow is pointing into the wagon, this will fill the pump. And we can place it, another one similarly here. We could place one there, but it won't attach because these two are going into the same wagon. So the most you could ever use on a wagon is 3 pumps. Now, just as with solid goods, we wanted a box to be used as a buffer in order to both buffer the materials and because it's faster to move from an inventory to an inventory, we want to place a tank immediately before each of these pumps, both as a buffer for the fluid and because the pump can move faster from a tank into the car than from a pipe. Unfortunately, this means that we cannot put 3 pumps on the same side, because no matter how we arrange this, it's not going to work. Now, it looks like it works. Hey, look, I've got 3 pumps on here, but I've got to do it on this one as well, and I have no way to attach that now. So if I wanted 3 pumps on a single wagon, the better way to do it is to use both sides. And that's a very common way to do things. So we can take this setup minus the train tracks and place it like so, and that'll set us up for all of our tanks. Now, pumps don't have a built-in filter option, but since fluids don't really mix, it doesn't matter too much. Similarly, we cannot filter the cart. So while we cannot implement either of those safety protocols, because in Factorio 0.17 you cannot mix fluids, it does not cause as much problems, because unless the system you're feeding into is completely empty, the wrong fluid will not come in. Now from here, it's fairly straightforward. The easiest thing you can do is something like this. And then we can, of course, we cannot walk through those pipes, so we're probably better off using some undergrounds. But from here, we can do something like that. Now, once again, there are balance issues. You want to make sure you're filling the tanks evenly. You can see this one has 24,000, this one only has 4.6, this one has 6, this one has 2.5, because fluid doesn't balance itself well on its own. There are techniques for balancing fuel They are more complicated. They tend to use more circuit conditions. One simple way to do it is to feed into pumps. This is not a perfect solution, but it does help. So if we take out all of this and instead do the following, we'll take some pumps and we'll feed into each tank with a pump. And of course, these we will need to do some undergrounds with. And then pipe sections. And now we can feed all of this into the pumps. The pumps will help us to a degree in keeping this more balanced, but it still will never be perfect. You can see that the ones on the ends are not filling as well, and fluid flow in Factorio is kind of strange. This happens. Notice also that we're trying to take one pipe worth of stuff and feed it into a lot of pumps and wagons. One option is to bring in a second line of oil from wherever it is coming from. So let's do that. That might help, because now we're bringing in twice as much oil. We can also separate the wagons this way. We can put that here, break this link, and now one line feeds the left two and the other line feeds the right two. It's no, not quite. We wanted this to break here. There we go. But still, you can see this one has 20, this one's full, this one's full, this one's full. Let's take a look at the pickup station. Works exactly the same way. We will use pumps, only instead of facing towards the train, we will face them away. And again, when we place them in the correct spots, they will and we want to feed from those pipes directly into tanks. And again, if we want to use 3, then we're going to want to use a tank on the other side. And then we want to bring this back out in some fashion. And again, we can do it the quick and dirty way, or if we want good balance, we can try to use some method for balancing the trains, balancing the cars, but this does work. So let's set this one to automatic. Let's set this one to automatic. And off it goes. And you can see that in fact it's emptying really quickly because it's going into empty tanks and filling takes longer because it's these tanks have to be saturated. Most of the delay in our initial fueling was from getting the oil into these tanks to begin with. Now that we've let them run for a while and they're fairly full, the system runs more smoothly. But again, as we use up the oil, it will slow down. Similarly up here, as we fill these output tanks, the oil can go out this way, but so fast. Again, if we add more outlet pipes, we'll be able to drain the system quicker. So that's oil stations. Conceptually, they're very, very similar to the solid stations, but you have to deal with the flow dynamics, and the biggest thing is you have to make sure all of these pumps are positioned correctly. One on each of those 3 little yellow rectangles that you get per wagon. If you misalign them, they will not work. So that's the design of the station itself. Now, how do we incorporate it with all of our other stuff? Well, there's a couple of different techniques. We could build stations just like this, right? And this could be either a pickup or a delivery station, doesn't matter. And you have this for coming on and this for going off. And then they can go their merry way. But the problem with this design is that if you have more, let's say this is a copper station and this is an iron station because we happen to have deposits nearby, and we have trains coming into each, but there's more than one train per material. Well, the first train into copper will go in here. If the next train is also copper, it'll wait here. But then the next train might be an iron train, which now will not be able to get into the iron station, despite the fact that the iron station is empty. The solution for this is a stacker. So, what is a stacker? Well, I'm glad you asked. Let's take these stations out of here, and we will do something like this. You can do stackers in many different ways. I will sometimes use these diagonal ones. Catherine of Skye uses them a lot, so I kind of got the idea from her. You can also do other shapes. So you need to make sure you have a piece of track that's long enough for, again, your longest train as usual. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Perfect. So we're going to do this. And there. And then that. Okay, now this will then lead into our station. Now usually if I'm going to do this, I will rotate it and put our station where do we need to be? Here? Nope. Let's bring this up. You like that? No, I don't like it. Nope. Nope. One more. Like so. And then I will take this and stick it maybe here. Let's copy our stations. Let's say it's an unloading station. Doesn't really matter. that curve there, but I do want... Get rid of this unnecessary stuff. Okay, so now we have two stations and a stacker. Now, how do we use it? Well, as a train, we'll have a train come in here, and we still want to make sure that this first block is big enough for the whole train, and it is. We're going to place a chain signal at the beginning of the stacker and a regular signal on each leg of the stacker. The reason we do that, it has to do with the way the pathfinding algorithm works. When a train leaves a station, it plots its course to its destination by the most efficient route possible. And even if stuff changes in the process, unless there's no way for it to get there that route, it'll stay on that route. So if it planned to go through this stacker, but that stacker became occupied, it would wait here for this stack. Chain signals, however, and not regular signals, force the train to recalculate the path. So if a train is already sitting in this spot when facing the other way, when another train gets here, it will go into the next bay. On the output of this is a junction. We want a chain signal on the output and rail signals on the inputs. And now you can see that this is blue because at least not all of the branches are available, but some are. And these are all green because a train can continue. Over here, we do much the same thing. We place a train signal here. We place a chain signal right there, making sure that we can fit the whole train, just barely not enough. Probably should move everything down one, but let's pretend we're using a 5-car train rather than a 6. When the train gets here, it'll decide, do I go this way or do I go that way? And this is a normal, ordinary station. Making sure that this block is long enough, and it's more than long enough. Now you can see this takes up a lot of space. This is a very simple design. It's a very straightforward design. I like this design a great deal, but it is very space consuming. The bigger your stacker is, the more stations you have, the more space you need. The longer your trains, the bigger these exit blocks need to be, unless, of course, you choose not to make them long enough, which is a possibility. We could do this. We could do something like this, but in that case, this needs to be either just removed or it needs to be a chain signal. Now, of course, this close together, there's no reason to make a separate signal. And same thing here. This can no longer be an exit signal. It has to be a chain signal. Which means that it might be more difficult for trains to get out of these blocks, out of these stations, to clear space for the next train. But with an adequately sized stacker, it should be okay. Now, this stacker, this is a parallel stacker. The trains come in parallel. The advantage is that any train can leave. The disadvantages are that there may be weirdnesses about how the game chooses which train to go. So if you have different stations here, different products, you've got to use a parallel stacker. But if these both use the same product and you're just using two stations to increase throughput so that you can get twice as much, let's say, iron offloaded, then you can also do a serial stacker. A serial stacker is nothing more than a long rail. I've seen different designs, but you can do something like, say, this. And then simply place, this becomes a chain signal again, a regular signal again. And then we place regular signals. It's important that these are regular signals. 6 apart. Something like that. And now, all we really have is just a really long queue. 1, 2, 3, 4, a bunch of trains can just stack up and wait here until a space opens in one of these bays. It is important for there to be a chain signal here to force the train to recalculate which station to go to. We probably don't need this last rail signal. Okay? Now, honestly, I almost always use parallel stackers, but serial stackers can work as well as long as these stations both deliver the same product. Now, there is another interesting station design that I found online as part of a blueprint book that uses mods. I will link it, but I'm not going to use their blueprint. I'm just going to reconstruct it because it doesn't really match what we need here. So this design used a separate in and out. This design uses a T. And what we do with the T is this. We're going to make a hard 90-degree turn. And then we're going to place our stations kind of here. And then this one Okay, so look what happens here. This is kind of... it took me a while to understand what this did, but once I figured it out, I was fairly pleased with it. Let's see. We don't need this. We don't need this. We don't need this. Not any of this stuff. Okay, so this happens to be an offloading station, but the same can be done with a loading station. So if we copy this, we can place several stations like so, with enough space for them to be clear of whatever we need them to be clear of. And then Let's make a copy of this, but only pick up the rails. We don't need this. We don't need this. Let's make another copy of just that piece. Now, look what we have. What happens from here? This is our entrance, and we can do a little bit of a, put some signals here like usual, because this is an entryway. We could have made these legs much shorter, but this is just how it happened. Now, this here is our stacker. So at the entrance of a stacker, we put a rail signal. Into each bay, we put a regular signal, a chain signal at the entrance, a regular signal at the end. At the output, we put a chain signal on each bay, and now we put another chain signal here, and this is our stations, except that I put the stations backwards. So the stations actually go here with chain signals at their outputs to come into here, and then we will place our actual station mechanisms and again, this is assuming output stations, but it works the same. Drop-off stations, it works the same with pickup stations. Here. So look what happens with a train. Let's say we have a train here, and we're gonna throw another station over there. Let's put some brackets on. So, what are these stations called? Stations get random names when you create them. This was actually a Kickstarter starter reward. The people that contributed money to the original development of Factorio got their names placed into stations and a few other places. So Scoob the Noob. Sounds good. Let's go to Scoob the Noob and watch what happens. We come off, we go around through one of the stackers and then get to our station. To exit, what's the station here? Benjamin Rickstein. Let's remove this one, add Benjamin Rickstein, and go there. We're gonna again go through one of the stackers and then back out to our station. Now, this seems a little complicated, and I honestly am not sure how good the throughput of this is, but look how much more compact this is than either this version or the version we previously had with the stackers, right? And we can add more stackers very, very easily. There's twice as many stackers with very little additional space. If we want more stations, we can cut this, copy this, and then bring our stackers back. Now, I have these belts coming out. With this kind of setup, usually you want to feed the belts in either from this side or from that side, whichever you prefer, and all we would do is something like this. Of course, then we would need to jump these trains, but that's not a huge deal, even with yellow belts. You just have to get a little creative. Actually, it is a big deal. So you may have to do something like that. However, if you're using red belts or blue belts, you can make those jumps much, much more easily. You can similarly, if depending on what... Oh, I actually screwed up the belts here. Because it's this one. There's our 4. You can similarly bring them out this way, whichever you prefer, depending on where it needs to go. We could also save some space by moving the whole thing up. We can take this and kind of stick it right there. Of course, we need to adjust our signals here to make sure we have enough space. But it works very nicely. The important thing is to make sure you have the right number of stackers. What you want to do is figure out how many trains could possibly be going into each station and have at least that many stackers plus one more for trains to be able to go around. So here we have 5 train stations. If each station can get 2 trains, well, that we need a total space for 10 trains. That's 5 in here, 5 here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, plus one more. We actually have 2 to spare. Good enough. I've become very fond of this train design. I don't know if it will cause gridlock or congestion with a lot of trains, because they're making these loops and all coming through these intersections, but I find it to be very space efficient. And of course, you can also build it going the other way, to the left side rather than to the right side, whichever you prefer. And you could use this type of exits and entrances into it as well, but I really like this approach. So that's stations. I am going to add one more thing that I did not mention in the last episode when we were working on these intersections, and that's we spent a lot of time working on T intersections. We didn't do any crosses. Up here, we laid out a cross where there's no way to switch between tracks, but one question people very frequently ask is, well, what about a true crossing intersection? What if I want let's grab a chunk of rail. What if I want to do this? How do I do that? Well, you could build a cross. There's lots of different designs. You can start saying, all right, well, from here I want to go that way, and I also want to be able to go this way, and then from here I need to be able to go that way, and also no, that way. Well, now you see you're getting kind of a mess, right? And this is only half, because we also need... There are designs for crosses. Let me find some in my rail books. Right, here's one design for a cross. You can see what an unholy mess this is, and because it's a very tight place, there's not a lot of space for signals. So if we look at the signals, this entire section is a red block, which means any train going through it in any direction ties up the entire center of the intersection. Now, the solution to this, of course, is to make bigger crosses. Here's a really big cross that is actually very, very efficient. But look at how huge it is. And that's, 2 lanes in each direction, and it needs all this space to get the trains sufficiently separated that they don't bind each other. I will include in the Google Doc a link to an article that evaluates a whole lot of different crosses. And what they find is that many crosses cause deadlock, and most crosses are throughput limited. They limit how many trains you can get through them. So what's the solution? What if you need to go in all 4 directions? Well, the real solution is to do this. Huh? We put a T here. And we put a T here, making sure that there's enough space between them for the longest train we're going to use. And now, rather than a cross, we have 2 T intersections, and as long as these distances are big enough so that a train can fit in there, this is going to pretty much always be more efficient, more deadlock proof, and allow more throughput than an actual cross. Usually the next question people ask, well, what about a roundabout? Can we do a roundabout? Yes, we can do a roundabout. They're even trickier to design than a cross. I mean, a roundabout to form a cross intersection with. There's millions of designs for crosses. Some are better than others. My recommendation is avoid crosses, avoid little crosses like the plague, and try to do this kind of staggered T intersections instead. You now know everything you need to know to build a rail network for your own game. You know how to lay down rails, how to put together stations, how to signal everything. Remember the basic design rules of signaling. The most important thing is that anytime you have a intersection, you want to make sure that a train can leave it before it enters it. Or put another way, any train that's permitted to enter the intersection will be able to leave the intersection without interfering with other trains going in other ways. The way that's generally done is a regular signal at the exit, chain signals at the entrance and at every crossing, and make sure that the exit block is big enough to fit your longest trains. And for stations, we need a way to load them, we need a way to unload them, we need a way to refuel our trains. We can do that with a separate depot or at one of the existing stations. So that's it. That's your basics. If you Google Factorio trains, you will find an inordinate amount of information about it. Articles, descriptions, many of them are very, very good. Some are less so. And the best way to learn is to experiment. Go and build some stations. See if they work. If you're having problems with them, post on the Steam forums or on the Reddit, on the Factorio subreddit, and ask. Post screenshots and ask for advice. 9 times out of 10, if there's a problem, it's because something got signaled incorrectly. It is altogether too easy to missignal an intersection, especially when you're just starting out. You can also find lots of blueprints. I do encourage you to develop your own. I've used a lot of blueprints developed by other people. Some of them have proven to be really, really wonderful. Others I'm regretting using, and I'm thinking that I would have been much better off had I developed my own. There's certainly blueprints out there that I've spent more time troubleshooting than it would have taken me to build. I will also include links to a few other... This concludes the main tutorial for trains. One of the things I am planning on doing is a more advanced... I don't even want to call it a tutorial, because tutorial implies that I know the answers and I'm giving them to you. Rather, I've been meaning to develop my own blueprint book for my uses. And while I just told you to not use other people's books, of course that does not apply to any book that I would develop, right? Or no, it still applies. But what I'm planning on doing is developing the book kind of live, and recording and trying to do, talk through my design process. And again, it's not a tutorial because I don't know going in what I'm going to be doing. It's more of a, here's how I think about designs, here's things that I'm considering. So when you're ready to build yours, you probably want to consider something similar. One very, very last thought, I just noticed we didn't finish signaling this. We put in this signal, we failed to put in these signals right here, and those are very important. Because without them, all of our stations were one big block, and that would have been a disaster. But there it is. The blueprint book that this design comes from, I will link, but it uses a mod called LTN, Logistic Train Network, which is a wonderful, wonderful mod. And if I ever do a series with mods, I will certainly be talking about it in great detail, but the blueprints use the LTN components. That being said, you can absolutely take those railbooks, delete the actual stations and some of the loading offloading stuff, put in regular stations, and just reuse it that way. The actual rails and signals are all correct. They're just using LTN stations and I think possibly some loaders, which is an alternative to using inserters that is not available in vanilla Factorio. That's it. With this information, you should be able to go ahead and try one of these yourself. And as always, make sure that you save your designs.